Hi. The uniqueness of the COVID experience from the athletic perspective is unique. It's obviously one thing that 99% of us, maybe all of us, have never truly experienced. Obviously the COVID itself is something we want to just see go bye-bye or at least become manageable so that we can prevent all the illness and death. However, sticking to the game plan of this particular session, I want to talk about the athletic experience as we pass through the COVID experience. I particularly want to draw your attention to one stark reality. For many of us, the game of bowling ceased to exist for approximately a year and a half. And during that year and a half, there was no substitution for it. Periodically, there may have been a month here, a month there. And in some cases, for example, in Saskatchewan's play experience, the game did come back in terms of being available for open play bowlers shortly after its initial shutdown. And then again, out east in the Maritimes, I believe a total shutdown was not the case for them. So let me delve into some of what I've recognized. A year and a half of abstinence, enforced abstinence. And even when those windows of opportunity came up, league bowlers were not going in to bowl. Particularly, I can say with confidence, the elite athletes were not going into practice when the lanes were becoming available. Vast majority of them stayed away for that year and a half, filling their time with something else. So, lo and behold, bowling starts up. And essentially, for the benefit of this session, September, August of 2021. We get to refamiliarize ourselves with bowling and its community and our social connections, etc., etc., etc. There were essentially two unique groups that suffered uniquely but similar issues. Those that averaged under 240 and those elite averages, individuals who were averaging pre-COVID over the 240 mark. The people averaging over the 240 mark tended to have a pretty decent ability to recall the muscle memory of the previous year and a half or the pre-COVID experience. And so, yes, when they originally started bowling, that higher average group, they did struggle a bit. Now, in the course of August 2021 to today's date, which is mid-November, I have worked with easily half a dozen of those elite athletes, specifically looking at what has gone wrong. I want to share that with you. First up, muscle memory, as I mentioned. We were able to rebuild that muscle memory just simply through the act of doing. Here's what was noticeable. When we went to league play, there was a stark difference between that and those bowlers, and sadly and admittedly, of the 7 proficient athletes I've worked with, only 3 chose to go and practice August through September. Only 3 out of 7. Those 3 went out to practice and they found that their muscle memory came back to them quite quickly. When leagues started for them, they stepped into the league play and ironically started to struggle a bit. The reason for that was not related to muscle memory, but it was related to the productive habits of the past having been forgotten. What we were taking for granted in terms of our productive habits that we did mentally to prepare for each frame, we had really just simply got out of the habit of doing. Consequently, our performance deteriorated when we shifted to league and or tournament play. Case in point, the athletes that I have been observing and working with went to 2 Western Pro Tour events, the Autumn Open in Calgary and the Sherwood's TPC event, both hugely successful in terms of the quantity of bowlers that participated. As always, the cream of the crop came through those 2 events. The top 14 in Calgary, the top 32 at the TPC played well. But let's roll the clock back a bit. Those first few weeks of league play, for the individuals that had been practicing, they noticed still a deterioration in their bowling, even though they could go back to the lanes and practice and do well. What was the difference? Well, first up, in the practice setting, there was a quicker repetition. They seldom stepped off the lane. They stepped back, picked up a ball, got ready, bowled again. Quick repetition. They were able to assimilate that knowledge quickly, and the muscle memory came back to them. However, what they did not practice were the productive mental habits that had previously existed, that they had, by and large, I would take, had either taken for granted before or simply forgotten because of the absence of being involved in the game prior. So what could I speak of in terms of productive habits, productive mental habits? Well, for example, of those 7 bowlers, each and every one of them recalled that the one piece that was missing in their game plan during competitive opportunities such as league play and tournament play was what they did with their mind between frames. What they did between frames. Some said, well, during my time between frames, what I usually do is socialize, visit. I haven't seen these people for a long time, and we visit. That was a common thread. And my question was, well, how does that differ from what you did pre-COVID? With rare exception of the 7, only one person of the 7 could say, no, it does not vary. The other 6 all stated that their pre-COVID experience between frames, okay, so prior to being up on the lane next, their pre-COVID experience was more functional. Now, that didn't mean they didn't have a little time for visit, but it meant they kept their conversations short and brief, and they always had a habit of isolating themselves in some manner. That may be by going for a walk. It may be finding a quiet space, a place where they could just collect themselves prior to the next turn. That was missing. That was a common thread amongst 6 out of the 7 players that I've been working with. They had simply got out of the productive habit that they had previously had pre-COVID when they were off the lane. The other part, 4 out of the 7 bowlers, mentioned they had also reneged on the use of a pre-shot routine. The pre-shot routine provides us with a stability in terms of our mindset and our preparation. It gives us an opportunity to take a breath, relax, and focus on one specific skill set potentially. 4 out of the 7 players had said they had got away from using the pre-shot routine. They had got to a place where they would walk up, not in a rush or a hurry, but they would get up, pick up a ball, and if the path was clear for them to get into their stance, they simply moved into their stance and went about throwing their ball. The third part that happened that was unique is their focus, the intensity of their focus, the intent of their focus from their first step through their approach tended to be vacant. In other words, it may be on hitting their spot. For example, that was a common refrain, hitting my spot. But it wasn't a focus throughout all their approach. It was just a stand in my stance, concentrating in my spot, and then go, expecting that their mind was going to stay there. And it didn't. They'd find themselves wandering down the lane, and just before release, their mind would scatter off somewhere else. Why? Because they had gone out of the productive habit that they had previously done. So basically here, we have 3 productive habits that had stopped functioning or were functioning in a limited capacity. 1, what they do between frames. 2, the implementation of a pre-shot routine. And 3, their focus as they go through their approach and delivery. That, ladies and gentlemen, came to me from a small sample pool, 7 proficient athletes, that all of which participated in the Chinook tournament, the autumn tournament in Calgary and the TPC in Edmonton. So the fix, reacquaint yourself to what you did prior to your turn to bowl. Reestablish your pre-shot routine. And the third part, give yourself a physical focus in your execution while you're going down your approach. Why? Because I believe our mind right now needs to have a specific skill set, functional, physical skill set to focus on as we're going down our approach. I believe that will evolve in relatively short order to being back to where you mentally were pre-COVID. All right? So now, that was the proficient athletes. For the lesser proficient athletes, the under 240 crowd, well, if we're talking about the people that are under 200, muscle memory was not nearly as sharp, not nearly as clear to recall. The people 200 to 240, they had muscle memory. They still do have muscle memory. Everybody has muscle memory, but it's the detail and the quality of what that muscle memory is. And it's encouraged and grows through practice. Keep in mind the value of practice here. Remember, I said with the proficient athlete of the 7, only 3 chose to practice. Okay? Those 3 bowlers, through practice, identifying the holes in their game when they did return to competitive league play, through our conversations, were able to acclimatize themselves, physically get themselves set and ready, and have a pretty good experience at the Autumn Open and TPC. Now, so let me back up here. The under 240 crowd, muscle memory is not as efficient because there are more tendencies for errors to come up. The fix, practice, but also, ladies and gentlemen, you may not have had a routine that you used between frames. You may have found that your time between frames was essentially social in nature. Now, I'm not necessarily advocating that you take that away permanently out of your vision. However, to move yourself back into the motion of bowling the way you normally do, how about if you gave yourself an experiment and for 3 weeks of league play chose to actually functionally spend time thinking about what it feels like to throw your best ball when you're off the lane between frames. Feel what it's like to throw your very best ball off the lane. I believe that will help you immensely. Next, the pre-shot routine for most of these people, again, not totally vacant, but not like it was before. And of course, third, their focus. They tend to also speed up, spend less time preparing themselves for the frame and just getting up there, getting in their stance and throwing. We all want to just do it, to just throw, but there is some planning that is valuable in advance, i.e., the big picture, what it feels like to throw well. The narrowing your focus to pre-shot routine, which is narrowing your focus to one thing to do, right? Maybe it's to take a slower, smaller first step. Maybe it's an awareness to lifting the ball out on the lane or rotating the ball. I'm suggesting in that period of time called pre-shot routine, the one skill set you give yourself is a physical skill set rather than just simply hitting your target. Because I believe right now there's a physical deterioration that has happened with being absent for 1.5 years. After about 3 weeks, as I said, give yourself an experiment. Test it out. Prove me wrong. I'd love to learn a new view of this whole process. Okay, so there you go. The under 240 crowd, not as much muscle memory working for them, and still needing to reacquaint themselves with the pre-shot routine, which for some of you was less efficient, but at least it was present. And the focus when you leave your stance position. I believe right now we need to switch from just hitting our point of aim and giving us some physical cue, because it helps us reacquaint ourselves with the kinesthetic feel of moving through our shot, which is critical. The most proficient athletes out there in any sport operate by feel. And when the feel deteriorates or when the feel shifts away from the norm, they're able to go through a mental checklist about what they need to correct. That's a conversation for another time. Now, I just want to wrap this up then and chew on the idea that I presented today about the pre-COVID experience and the current experience moving through COVID, August, September of 2021 onward. All right? Thank you very much. By the way, any questions you have, by all means, please drop me a note at Success Driven Logic. I'd be glad to assist you. And look in the near future for a program to invite you to be part of a Zoom meeting, a national Zoom meeting on a topic of stress management. All right, good. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Take care, play well, hold your follow through. Good job. Thank you.